What a good doggy! What a good doggy! This is talking normal, right? This is how everyone talks to their dogs. Like a normal person. Hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Post Facto, which is episode 8 of season 1 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Voyager, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the first season episode, Post Facto. So Post Facto is the episode in which Tom and Harry go to the planet to try to get new technology or find quicker ways home or some junk like that, but the planet is in the middle of a war, so Voyager holds back. But then Tom Paris is arrested, tried, and convicted and punished for murdering somebody, and so by the time they pick up Tom Paris, he has this sting implanted in his head that makes him relive the last moments of the victim's life over and over and over again, which show Tom Paris killing him. But Paris insists that he didn't do it, even though the evidence of the last moments of life from the victim claim otherwise. So Janeway takes Voyager into the war zone and barges in there, investigates. Tuvok runs an investigation and trying to figure out what's really going on, because they say that Paris had an affair with the victim's wife and that he caught them in the act, and that's why Paris killed him. But he does some investigating and he's figures out something's fishy, because the aliens they're at war with originally wouldn't let them go into space, or were okay with them going into space, which was weird. Neelix said they were acting out of character, oh yeah, sure, you can go in. But as soon as Tom Paris comes aboard the ship, they start attacking. And when they say, oh, there's a shuttle with Tom Paris going to the planet, they attack the shuttle. And so basically Tuvok figures out that it's the Doctor who did it. He changed the memory anagrams or whatever to make it appear like it was Tom Paris, but it was really him. And he's also a spy working for those aliens, and so encoded in the memories that Tom is experiencing over and over again is some code for the secret weapon that the victim scientist was building, and he's trying to get that information to the enemy, and that was the best way he could do it. So Tuvok uncovers everything, so Paris is, freed from that thing and let off the hook, and everyone goes off happy. So, we are at episode 8, and here we are, the first real stinker of the show. The first episode that really kind of sucks. Now, to be fair to Voyager, episode 8's not bad, because Next Generation got there in episode 2. Really got there in episode 3, but 2 qualifies as well. And Deep Space Nine got there episode 3. And I think Enterprise, I would say episode 2. Maybe even episode 1, but we'll give the benefit of the doubt and say episode 2. And Voyager, it took it 8 episodes to get to a bad episode. So that's not bad. First 7 episodes were good to decent. To very good. And then you finally get to a stinker. So, just to explain my opening there, if you know the scene when the scientist comes home with Tom and Harry, and he sees the dog, and he just randomly goes up and pets the dog, and it's what a good doggy, what a good doggy. What? Why? People don't. But here's the thing. That is symbolic. That is representative, I should say, of all the acting and dialogue in, not all, but most of it in this episode, which is cringy, out of character, bad acting. This episode is filled with bad acting. That actor in particular was probably the worst, who was playing the scientist. Oh, he was so unnatural and so over the top, and just my dear scientist. He was so terrible. And then the woman who played his wife was I guess I would classify her as terrible because she was just cliche. She was just like a walking, talking, Noir dame cliche. With her, it was almost more the dialogue that was worse, if I'm being honest. And then the other dude that played the prime minister or whatever, and the doctor guy, like, those are pretty bad as well, and the aliens are pretty goofy and bad, and it's just bad acting. And freaking, I'm sorry, Robert Duncan McNeil also got some bad acting in there as well, particularly the scenes with him and the woman having their little affair. Again, most of the dialogue is to blame for that, but the dialogue's so unnatural. Now, I mentioned this episode a couple times before because it's one of those episodes that have a very strong noir film noir feel to it. Like, they're really trying to do that noir film. And I talk about in DS9 with Necessary Evil. It's the only episode that really pulls this off well. I mean, you could argue Aquiel, which, by the way, much better episode. and Aquiel, we find out it was the dog that did the murder. In this case, the dog identifies the murderer, so it's similar. But anyway, Aquiel doesn't, in my opinion, it is inspired by a noir film, and it definitely has that tinge of a feel to it, but it doesn't lean heavily into it the way that this episode and Necessary Evil and Suspicions do. They lean heavily into it. In fact, I would argue that this episode leans into it the most. Now, Necessary Evil, I did find that some of the noir, the conventions of noir, I did find them a little bit distracting and a little silly and a little bit out of place, but it mostly works to tell a really good episode, whereas in this episode, it just flat out doesn't work at all. It doesn't compute, it doesn't fit into Voyager, it just comes off as hugely contrived, very badly written. Like Suspicions is an example that was very poorly written. It's like bad written dialogue, and they were you're trying to do these murder mystery noir cliches, and just doing such terrible job. And this is another example of that. I dare say worse. I find it cringier. Like this, it's one of those episodes that I really wanted to turn off while I was watching it. When I get to the scene, it's painful to watch. Like, and I get to the scenes of, particularly with Paris and the woman having their little affair, and the dialogue. Their dialogue's so contrived, it's not earned. It doesn't make any sense. It's just coming out of nowhere, like, oh, well, I'm lonely and whatever. And it's just a walking, talking cliche. If someone just grabbed a fucking script from a random noir detective thing and just shoved it in there and say, here, read this. It has nothing to do with anything else in the goddamn episode. Nothing like the characters. It's so fucking out of place. Terrible. And terribly written. It's just so cliche. I really, as I'm watching, I was like, do I really need to force myself to watch this crap? Can I just fast forward to this? But no. I watched it. But anyway. So the funny thing is Michael Piller really liked this episode, and as I said, I do really like him as a writer, but he's not always right. Jerry Taylor, on the other hand, did not like this episode. And she has a quote of saying it's one of the rare instances where, Michael and I agree or disagree on an episode, is what she said. And I side with her. 100% side with her. Apparently, this episode was written before they cast Tom Paris. So they said they originally envisioned this character to be like a womanizer and very cheesy, and that's how he is at the start of the show, but they do gradually change. But they did say once they cast him, they start writing for him differently, and I do notice that his character is a little off. The other episode this episode reminded me of was Matter Perspective from TNG, which is a much far superior episode than this one. I'm just sorry, but it is. But it's also similar, because that was Riker and Geordi going to the scientists, and Riker ends up having an affair, or an alleged affair, with the scientist's wife, and it's pretty much the same thing here. Tom and Harry go and to the scientist, and Tom has an alleged affair with the scientist's wife, and the scientist ends up dead, and he's accused for the murder, just like freaking Riker was. It was like just like that episode, pretty much. But I think it was much far superior episode. It was nowhere near. It didn't have all this cringy, terrible fucking dialogue that just made me want to rip out my ears. Like, it's so bad. And yes, speaking of Matter Perspective, this is the wrongfully accused cliche. I talked about this before. I think Matter Perspective is actually one of the best examples. And by wrongfully accused, I'm specifically talking about being accused of a murder. So something like Drumhead, I don't think counts. Or some other thing that someone's, wrongfully accused of something. Now, I'm talking about a main officer is said to have killed someone, like Wolf in the Fold, or this, or Matter Perspective, and there's probably a dozen other episodes like that, but where they specifically are accused of killing someone. And it is a cliche that I fucking hate. I think it's very lazy, and it's very overused. It's very cliche, and because you know that our main character is not guilty, so there's no point. It deflates any sort of interest in here, and it's just like, Tom Paris is accused of killing this person, and the memories show that he's doing it. Well, we know that's not true. We know there's something wrong with the memory, and at the end of the episode, they reveal there's something wrong with the memory's alter. We're like, duh, of course. That's so obvious, because this is such a cliche. Goddamn wrongfully accused cliche. So, this is Voyager just started, and they set it in the Delta Quadrant, this far distant place, and the part is we're sick of doing the normal stuff, seeing Klingons and whatnot. We want to do something original, it's something really weird and beyond. They're in this new space, so they come across an alien race with dogs as pets, and they're smoking cigarettes and acting like they belong in a 1930s noir film, or 1940s, if you will. Doesn't matter. That does not seem like it's in the far off land of the Delta Quadrant. It seems like it's right fucking here on Earth. They have a dog. They have a dog in the fucking Delta Quadrant. What the hell? And they even call the dog, and it acts like a dog, and it's not even. They didn't even bother to go to the original series route and put horns on it and say this is some strange animal. It's just flat out a dog. I mean, and that on its own isn't so bad. It's the fact they combine it with, smoking cigarette in 1930s, dame or whatever. It's just this not the fucking Delta Quadrant. You set your show on the other side of the galaxy just so you can do 1930s noir. Drives me off the walls. So let's get to the wacky premise, which apparently was the original pitch, which actually sounded like a good pitch to me. It's Michael Piller decided to turn it into his noir, which I think was the death of the script. But the original pitch had to do with an alien race who punishes crimes by making them relive the victim's last moments, particularly murder, make them relive the victim's last moment of the murder over and over again, which I think is an interesting concept. it does make you wonder the sort of morality or the effectiveness of using that as a punishment. Is that better, perhaps, than sending people to prison? So it is an interesting thought experiment in that way, and it's just totally mishandled. But the thing is, so it's kind of similar to the episode Hard Time in DS9, which I haven't gotten to yet. Hasn't aired at this point. Because we're in 1995. But anyway, it hasn't aired yet when this episode aired. So it's similar, because that was about an alien who had a system of punishment where if someone was, found guilty of a crime, they would sentence them to like 40, 60 years in prison, but they would all live this in their head. It would just be a memory implanted. So for them, they would have been around for 60 years, but really it's just been a couple minutes. And that is such an overrated episode. I already covered that, but I'll get to it with the revisited eventually. But anyway, and I mentioned this before, I think, and maybe my review for that episode, is that even though this is clearly a worse episode, like this is no question, this is a much worse episode, the concept of the punishment actually makes more sense in this episode than it does in Hard Time. In Hard Time, it doesn't make any sense. Because the whole point of one of the main points, I think, of putting people in prison is to keep them away from society so they can't do any harm. I mean, depending on the situation, sometimes it is mainly just to punish them, even if you don't think they're going to cause any more harm. They shouldn't just get away with it scot-free. Whereas the Hard Time concept that negates the whole taking them away from society, you're just going to put trauma in them. And I talked about in that episode is that if someone who has a violent mind, who actually really is a violent person, because O'Brien isn't, he of course was falsely accused, but someone who actually is violent probably aren't going to be deterred by something like that. So it seems like a very ineffective, very wasted time, like a really stupid concept that's completely impractical, that no one would ever put to practical use. Whereas this actually does make a degree of sense, of practical sense, of course. But they had to combine it, of course, with the falsely accused thing. It would have been more interesting if it was actually, maybe not even a character on Voyager, but maybe another character who actually was guilty, and they were having to relive the lives, and the Voyager crew was having to interact with them and asked hard moral questions about, is this, function of punishment ethical or not? That would have been a really fascinating, interesting episode they could have explored, but instead of doing that, they did a fucking wrongfully accused cliche with a fucking dog and terrible, cringy, dumb dialogue and horrible acting. Now, all that being said, this episode actually wasn't totally terrible. There were moments that I was actually interested, that I was like, oh, this is interesting, and piqued my interest. I had to get through those fucking scenes with the terrible dialogue to get to them, but the main part of the story that did really work for me, well, I liked the whole conflict and the way that Janeway handled the conflict and stuck up for her officer and was like, oh, fuck them, we're going to go in and show our force and prove Tom's innocence. Like, I liked that, but the main thing I liked was the Tuvok investigation and showing his investigation style. Again, though, I got kind of flashes of Odo and Necessary Evils. It's very similar to that. But it was because we're still getting to know these characters. We're still getting to know Tuvok. And I think it was kind of interesting seeing him put the pieces together and and frame them to set them up, because he figured out it was the alien spy or whatever, and he exposed them. They said that part was based off of Agatha Christie novel, and it did seem so sort of similar the way he gathered everyone, like, and revealed it all. Yeah, and so it's fine. Like, I find it interesting. But I just don't think that it's definitely not enough to negate all the terribleness in this episode. So anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on the Patreons. Very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel, help me move forward, and yeah, I'm very much appreciated for everyone who supports me on Patreon, but especially Jordan Johnson, Antarius, and Brandon L. House. Thank you so very, very much for your strong support. But I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Metajester, Joe Lavals, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Post Facto, more like sex gross, that's a no. I really like that one. You're getting better at these. I don't remember this episode. I only know it doesn't feature any of the beloved characters we want to see, like that one episode of Voyager where the man in black from Lost shows up. What do you think would happen if that character ran into the Admiral from the TNG episode Pegasus? If John Locke and the man in black came face to face in Trek? Sign me up. Let me know when J.J. Abrams makes that happen. Yeah, I remember the man in black. Well, I recognized him first from being in Star Trek and Voyager, and then later I said, hey, when I saw Lost, I was like, this guy. And of course, the same thing with John Locke, obviously. But, they should have had the two of those characters meet up. And they could also meet up with Kivas Fajo, the collector, because he played Michael's lawyer on Lost. So, so he can meet up there. They have Kivas Fajo and God, I'm sure there's some other Star Trek. Oh, Ensign Rowe could show up because she played that one lawyer on Lost. So, anyway, I'll have a whole Characters of Lost thing. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, from the dog did it in TNG to the dog solved it in Voyager, and in spite of their attempts, still looks too much like a dog from Earth, LOL. For all the attempts made at Film Noir, or which I'd argue only done successfully once, Necessary Evil in DS9, this one hands down is the worst. LeVar Burton could not save this monstrosity, and I keep hearing one podcast group mocking Detective Tuvok, rightfully justified when looking at this episode. Yes, like in Dax, there is a twist where things are different than what appears and has to do with the planet's politics, but it's still dreadful. Paris is no Riker, and in fact, they ended up taking him a different direction later in the series as eventually the Family Man, which, if true to continuity was done between scripts, yes, we could have more easily buy it. But right now, Paris still needs a haircut, LOL. So him getting into trouble as Riker did in a matter of perspective is not comparable as we cared about Riker. Tom Paris so far not quite, and is at this point indistinguishable from Nick Locarno. I mean, McNeil did not like Paris at this point in the series from what he said at the point in Delta Flyers. I give this episode 1 noir dog in the Delta Quadrant out of 10. What a good dog! I actually prefer Paris being the womanizer, ladies. Maybe not to the extent of like Riker or Kirk, but I prefer that to him being married to B'Elanna, because the two of them had no chemistry and never should have been together in the first place. So I think they should have kept him as a womanizer, just maybe toned it down a bit. The one good thing I will say this episode has above matter of perspective is that at the very least, when they had the widow tell her versions of events, she didn't exaggerate to make Tom Paris try to rape her or anything like that, like the other one did in A Matter of Perspective to Riker. That was the part of the episode that was kind of a blemish to me, because it was just too over the top. They did their stories were pretty much similar. In fact, she told the truth of her actual meeting with Tom Paris, but then she just added this other scene that wasn't actually Tom Paris, it was that other doctor dude. But other than that, the way they portrayed them was actually true to, like, their stories matched. It didn't, like, and because I think that would have been repetitive too if they did another Matter of Perspective thing. So anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, so this is the first poor episode of Voyager, although I liked it a little bit better this time. Another entry into the wrongly accused episode list, and a bad copy of the episode of Matter of Perspective that also features an affair with the wife of a scientist and memories as evidence. This is the first Tuvok episode who didn't have much attention yet, but his character isn't portrayed very interestingly in my opinion. Dogs on a planet in the Delta Quadrant? Well, at least they didn't stick a horn to the dog as they did with Enemy Within. Next week on Voyager, on another planet, Janeway is accused of stealing coffee, and this time it's not a false accusation. My rating is a weak 4 out of 10. Yeah, I actually think it would have been better if they stuck a horn with it and said, what is this strange animal? At least that would make more sense than having a dog in the goddamn Delta Quadrant. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky. He says, unfortunately, we come to the blemish of the great first season of Voyager, and there are so many things wrong with this episode. For one thing, how many times are we going to see the wrongfully accused when we know for a fact that they didn't do it? I hate that cliche with a passion. And also, you're telling me that 75,000 light years away from Earth, there are dogs over there, and also people who smoke like from a Detective Noir novel or film. I mean, this is beyond stupid. Although I wouldn't exactly say it's top 5 worst of the show, but it is easily the worst episode of the first season, so my rating is a 1 out of 10. I think I'm probably going to end up agreeing with you on the worst episode of the first season. And here's the thing. Like, and I'm sure you agree, the first season is still amazing. Because every season has their bad episodes. Like, just because there's a bad episode in a season doesn't mean the whole season's bad. There would be no good seasons if that were the case, except for season 3 of Voyager. I mean, not Voyager, TNG. but because that's the only season, I think, in existence of Star Trek that doesn't have at least one bad episode. But anyway, season 1 of Strange New Worlds maybe, but that's cheating because it's only a 10-episode season. But anyway, well, I had that one with those pirates doing this, henchmen. They're appealing to the henchmen and tricking them. I fucking hate that cliche. But the rest of the episode was actually fine, but I hate that cliche. But anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howes. He says, I like a good film noir, but this isn't it. The dialogue is terrible. The villain is even given a name, and I can't watch I can't remember how you pronounce the aliens' names, Bonians or something, without thinking of Dr. Migimaloo. It kind of looks similar, maybe. Don't look like birds, though. Sorry, I have just recently finished binge watching all of Lower Decks. Voyager is 70 years away from home, and they run into this family who act like your stereotypical soap opera husband and wife, even to the extent of having a doggy. What's her name? Little? I'm not sure. Anyway, Sexy Tramp tells Kim and Paris to help themselves to drinks. No one even gets out of tricorder to see if the drinks are fit for human consumption, and the same applies to the Rolka meat. Everyone except Tuvok is an idiot in this episode. Someone should have told Tom Paris that making out with your host's wife is not acceptable behavior. Neelix, to be honest, whenever I saw the Numari coming, I always left before the intimidation began, and then breaks out into forced laughter is painfully unfunny. If I may recommend a better detective story on Star Trek, Necessary Evil is the best, in my humble opinion. This episode is noteworthy for the first Vulcan mind meld on Voyager, but even that won't change my rating. One piece of spoiled Rolk out of 10. Yeah, the scene with Neelix, I don't know, I didn't find it painfully unfunny. I think it kind of, I didn't find it funny, to be clear, but it kind of portrayed, okay, here's the thing, I did find it a little bit funny. Not what Neelix said, but Janeway's reaction to him, because he was like laughing hysterically at a joke that wasn't funny, and then Janeway just ignored him and gave him this look like, shut the fuck up, this is serious, can we get back on topic? And I did find kind of funny. And also I think it portrayed Neelix's character as, again, he's different back here at the start of season 1, but it portrayed him as sort of unserious or not very professional, which they're doing a good job of that. You can't argue with that. Like he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing, kind of, sort of. But anyway. Next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, it doesn't matter about a dog. It doesn't matter about a smoke. It doesn't matter about Tom being accused of murder. It doesn't matter that this is a complete ripoff of another bad episode of Matter of Perspective. The only reason this episode is better than that pile of garbage that was on TNG, 1, the scene with the Doctor and Kes were good. 2, Neelix giving okay advice. 3, Tuvok doing an investigation and then cheating with a mind meld. Well, it's better than using a fucking holodeck simulation. I don't know why cheating is there, but I'm too lazy to delete it. So my rating is 5. I'm glad Tom Paris didn't become a man whore like Riker and TNG, out of 10. I have the Needle comment. This is the best episode of Voyager, almost where they almost get home or close to home scenario that went from this is interesting to outright embarrassment, as Voyager overplayed this storyline way too much. What makes this even worse is in the final episode we don't even see the Voyager crew get to Earth. Vaughn Armstrong makes his first of many Voyager appearances, so my rating is 10. This episode was heartbreaking to watch for the crew as it came first, even if the storyline was repeated about 500 million times. It doesn't take away from the magnificent episode, out of 10. I think the actual number of times they did the almost got home but didn't quite would be more like 6 than 500 million, but close. But I know it feels like a lot because they keep doing the storyline. Well, maybe more like 8. I never counted it, but still, definitely not more than 10. But yes, that was the best version. It's not just that it came first; it was the best version. That and Timeless. Timeless was also great. But yeah, there's sort of the best versions of doing it. But many other reasons I outlined in my revisited for that episode why it's so amazing. So we agree on Eye of the Needle, not so much on Ex Post Facto, though, because it does matter about the dog, it does matter about the smoke, and it does matter about the accused murder, and it does matter that they're ripping off the better, more superior TNG episode of Matter of Perspective. So we disagree there. And the fact that Tuvok... Oh yeah, you might have saw me grimace when I was reading the scenes between the the Neelix giving okay advice. Like Neelix, what? I mean, I guess, but we were just talking about how he's just laughing for no reason and being shitty. I mean, his advice, I guess, was okay because he was telling them this is out of character for them and he's suspicious and he was right in that matter. But other than that, he's just being like terrible at his job. And yeah, the scenes with the Doctor and Kes were good, but they were good also in the previous episode, which was a way far superior episode. So, and Tuvok investigating, as I mentioned, was pretty interesting and definitely better than I remember. But again, I don't think it's enough to save this episode. I think, to me, those negatives, which you say don't matter, are way overpower. And with the negatives, I would also add the terrible dialogue, the terrible writing, and the cheesiness. Oh, what the bad acting! What a good doggy! What a good... Can't get over how terrible the acting is in this episode. Oh, jeez. Anyway, so this is another time, yet another time, Stephen, where the two of us will have to agree to disagree. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So, my rating for Post Facto out of 10 is going to be a 2, extremely poor. Now, I think I've given this episode a 1 in the past, and maybe I have given it a 2, because I can't really give it a 1 because there were parts of it I found interesting. There were parts I was actually invested in, like the Tuvok investigation or the political intrigue with the aliens. But whenever we went to the Dame or whatever, the scientist or Tom Paris memories, or the whole thing with the Dame and Tuvok interrogating her was just ripped right out of Necessary Evil. And the terrible dialogue and the terrible acting and the trying so fucking hard to make it a film noir, that just tanked it for me. It was painful to get through. And so any positives in this episode pale in comparison to that, but they're at least enough to prevent this episode from getting a 1. That's it. Anyway, that is it for my review of Post Facto. If you enjoyed this review, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. All those sort of things really helps the channel. And if you really want to support the channel like really hard, you can do so by supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below, take you to Patreon. Different rewards, different tiers. I do a Patreon only series where I revisit my reviews for episodes I've already made, and there's other rewards such as pre-releases, or you can request a video for me to do, be able to make comments, I'll read in my videos, that sort of thing, if that's your thing. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Let's see. So Thursday will be my review for Emanations, and Saturday I'll be over on Patreon to revisit my review for Prime Factors. Great episode. So then on Monday will be the not so great episode, Distant Voices. Yeah. And then on Wednesday, another pretty good episode will be reviewing State of Flux. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and many other Star Trek videos and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.